and welcome to The Blockchain and Us, where pioneers and thought leaders talk about their journey in blockchain technology, crypto assets, and the token economy. And I'm your host, Manuel Staggers. This episode has support from 8th Grade, Story-Driven Media. 8th Grade is a media production company with a focus on telling engaging stories about new technologies and the future, with films, interviews, podcasts, and other media that make an impact. To learn more about story-driven media, visit 8gr8.com. My guest today is Lucas Betschart. Lucas is president of the Bitcoin Association Switzerland, the world's 4th largest Bitcoin community. He is involved in Bitcoin since early 2013, and he is head of technology crypto assets at Inacta and the founder of 21 Lectures with the mission to bring more developers to the Bitcoin ecosystem. And now to the conversation with Lucas Betschart. Hi, Lucas, and many thanks for taking time today.
Thanks for having me.
Lucas, you're developing 21 Lectures, your own program teaching blockchain coding skills to people. What kind of skills do you teach there?
So the skills depend a bit on the goal, and the goal is to enable people to build applications with Bitcoin, Bitcoin the currency. So we're teaching about Bitcoin the protocol, about also the tools around it. So what kind of tools can you actually use? We're teaching about cryptography, and we also teach about Lightning. So how the protocol works, but also how to build applications on top of Lightning. Mm-hmm. So we learn about the basics of Bitcoin itself, meaning about how transactions are built, what kind of signatures there exist, just on the basic levels. We learn about the peer-to-peer network, how blocks are parsed, how they're built. Then we have lots of practical exercises using libBitcoin Explorer, which we also introduce, like how would you use that library to build applications yourself afterwards. Then we have more about cryptography, more a bit hardcore stuff also outside of Bitcoin, but which are very interesting to know, is the zero knowledge proof and ring signatures. And then we also have just some stuff on the history of Bitcoin, so people get a little bit of insight how it all started, the theory and practice of actually dealing with Bitcoin itself, especially when you build your own wallet. And then on the last day, Christian Decker is talking about Lightning, where we have the similar again, where he explains how the Lightning protocol works, but also how can you build on Lightning. And then we have, or at least last time we had a small demo of somebody who built something with Lightning and what kind of software stack he used for that. So it's a mix between theory and practical exercises. And the end goal is that after this course, people should be able to sit down, use a library, and build an application on top of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Who's the class for, mainly?
The class is for people with a technical background, so developers mostly. We also had consultants attending the last one, but it's really, you need to have a technical understanding, otherwise it's difficult to follow.
A technical understanding meaning a coding background, or what do you mean with that?
A coding background is for sure the most helpful, but if you're a, let's say, software architect or a system administrator, or you just have some education with technology, then you should be fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We also just before we started recording, we spoke about, some of the difficulties with understanding, all the things involved in coding in the blockchain field. And you mentioned, some people may have a very good tech background, but then they don't understand really how Bitcoin works and how the blockchain works. So how do you go about teaching that part?
Yeah, so our first version was like 4 days about Bitcoin, and that was really tough because it was very fast into the details. So now we decided to actually make an additional 2 days beginners class, where we just give a high-level overview for stuff that is very easy for people who are in Bitcoin, also since longer time, that have no technical background maybe, but just like what does a node actually do? How does the network look like? What is mining? All that stuff that is obvious to us is still new for us, for a developer, right? And that's since the goal is getting in more developers and not just educating the developers that are already in Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. You just mentioned goal. I just wanted to ask you, what is the goal that you pursue with the class?
So it's really, I think when we have more developers in the space, then it's a benefit for everyone. That means companies have more potential hires that already have the skills, but also open source projects. I mean, my wish would of course be that people actually who attend this class will contribute to open source projects in the end. Bitcoin open source project, obviously, because that's a win for everyone in the ecosystem. I mean, the more people contribute to open source projects, the more usable Bitcoin gets as itself, the more other people can use those open source projects and build stuff on top of it, which also means that we make it easier to use. We create more use cases, which creates more adoption. So that also potentially increases the price, which is again a win for everybody who is in Bitcoin, because then he has more resources again to do more stuff. So it's like a positive loop. That's why I think it's very important that we have more and more developers in the space. And I mean, it's not just, everybody knows that it's not just Bitcoin, it's in all kind of ecosystems where that is super critical to have many developers.
You just mentioned open source projects, and I think that's a big question, right? For all kinds of open source projects, not just Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. How do you get people to contribute and develop this ecosystem? So do you think education is the bottleneck there, that just not enough people know how to do that? Or what's your view on that?
It's both. I think it's education for sure. I mean, it's always like the door opener, but also the incentive. I mean, having a direct incentive by being paid from somebody to do that, of course, that's the easiest one, but it's also the trickiest one. But the other is getting reputation from contributing to that. So that is something Bitcoin Core solved very well. I mean, it's like Bitcoin Core developers are kind of like seen as semi-gods within some parts of the Bitcoin community. And unfortunately, other projects are, in my opinion, as critical, don't get as much attention. So you don't have that much of an incentive to contribute to those if you're just like working out, helping them in your free time, which is tough to solve. But I think if we as a community just try to focus also a bit on promote the other projects. Without, I mean, you don't need to contribute code then yourself, but just like making them more visible so others also get bigger incentives to actually contribute again to those open source projects. I think that's a way to solve this problem a little bit.
What is the main difficulty in learning blockchain-specific coding?
I don't think it's any different than learning about any other technology. You just need to have good material, good teachers, and then everybody can learn it. I don't think there is any special magic to it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you, as a programmer, you got started with which languages? C++?
C++.
Okay. And then
Bitcoin is just a protocol in the definition of the consensus. But the main implementation the Bitcoin Core is in C++. But the libraries around that, you can actually build transactions and addresses.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's say you know C++, right? If you want to start working and contributing to open source projects in the Bitcoin field, what else do you need to know?
You should know how Bitcoin itself works, meaning what a node does, how mining works, how transactions are built, how addresses are built, and then so all this Bitcoin basics, and then it depends what specifically you want to contribute. You need to dig into that, and then you need to know about how is the contribution process working for that specific open source project. I mean, Bitcoin itself is a protocol and the definition, the consensus part, and then it can be implemented in any language. So you have Bitcoin Core, which is implemented in C++. And if you want to contribute to Bitcoin Core itself, then you need to write some C++, like for Bitcoin Core. But if you just want to build an application on top of it, then you can pick any language and just use the interfaces that Bitcoin Core provides to you. And then let's say if you use Go, you're probably going to pick one of these Go libraries, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And this is like also a big part of what we try to teach, is that what is actually out there that you can already use. So we don't want people to write their own full node software. It doesn't make sense. But we want people to be able to interact with the Bitcoin network, build software on top of it.
Okay. So if somebody had an idea for a new kind of wallet, for example, what would they do?
Well, they would pick the technology stack that they know best and make most sense for them. Pick the programming language and then look out for what's the best Bitcoin library in that language, or pick the library and learn the language. Maybe that's not the best approach, and then makes sense to get feedback as early as possible, I would say, and then try to build it. Yeah.
Okay. Is there a specific anatomy to building an application on top of Bitcoin?
I wouldn't say it's any different than another software development project, but it's very important to have an additional view on security because it's about other people's money. So it makes sense to have like audits from a company, or maybe if it's an open source project, you get some free audits from others, and they just put a lot of stuff in what could go wrong. That's very important here, because if it's a bug, it might not just be that the app crashes like somewhere else, but that somebody loses money.
So in your class, you focus mainly, or you focus only on Bitcoin. Why not other blockchains like Ethereum, for example?
Yes, we focus only on Bitcoin because for two reasons. I think if you cannot cover all the other blockchains, and then where do I put the limit? And the other thing is I'm interested in Bitcoin and not in the altcoins. So I don't think that would make sense to expand it. And then also like the course would take way more days. It would just be too much. So I expect people to sign up because they want to learn more about Bitcoin. Additionally, I have to say, when you understand Bitcoin really well, it's also way easier to understand the other cryptocurrencies. So it's a good starting point.
Mm-hmm. What is your view on some of the other currencies besides Bitcoin?
So, I like a few of the other projects, like Monero. I see some synergies that you can take advantage when you like build on one project, and then you can, like when you're very close to Bitcoin, like Litecoin or Feathercoin, you can use that synergies and like build for both currencies at the same time. So you can finance Bitcoin development by developing for another currency. But I don't like this Ethereum. I don't like, especially because they opened the door for, like, they kind of made ICOs legit. Before Ethereum, how I see it at least, it was everything that wasn't the first start was considered a scam. Meaning, if you did some pre-mining or sold coins before you actually had a product, or let's say, if you didn't start with everybody has the same chance and everybody starts mining at the same day, then it was considered a scam. And then Ethereum came and changed that. They kept a lot of coins for themselves and they sold 80% of the ever existing supply to the market. And this is not something I can agree on with. I don't think this is the idea behind Bitcoin, or so I really don't like Ethereum for that reason. That's the motivation, ideological part. And from technical position, I just don't think it will work out. I don't think they will solve the scaling. And then the third one is, I don't believe in decentralized Turing-complete smart contracts. I'm asking the Ethereum guys the same thing always, like, what's your use case? Why do you actually need that? And then they come up with something and decentralized. But if you don't need to be censorship resistant, you don't want to be decentralized, since you only have disadvantages of being decentralized. And I haven't seen anything of that need to be censorship resistant. But yeah, maybe I'm just too conservative and not too futuristic in my thinking.
Mm-hmm. But your analysis of Ethereum is that it's basically just an ICO platform, and that was that. It had its moment in the sun, and it's over.
Exactly. I think long term there's no value there.
Okay. But how's that affecting the whole crypto space? I mean, imagine all these ICOs go down to zero. That's not good, not necessarily good press.
Yeah, that's a bit a problem for us, because like from the outside, all crypto looks the same. On the other hand, I mean, if you have some shakeouts and only the good apples stay, I think that's good for the long term. So maybe they will just quietly disappear. I mean, most of those projects who shut down, they didn't make a press release and say, you're not here anymore. So we can just hope that the media doesn't pick it up.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Speaking of the media, what do you think journalists and people in general should understand better about Bitcoin?
That the currency and the technology are two different things. So for me, you can have Bitcoin, the currency, in very many different ways and transfer it in many different ways. And then is Bitcoin blockchain as the technology, which is the underlying thing that enables the others to transfer Bitcoin in different ways. But it's really like I have Swiss francs in my wallet and my bank accounts. It's the same Swiss francs, but it's all different technology stacks. And the same is possible for Bitcoin.
But what does that mean exactly? I mean, what is an example of this?
Just that you can transfer Bitcoins without transferring it on the Bitcoin blockchain. Meaning you can use Lightning, you can hand out paper wallets. So you have different features by using different technologies to transfer Bitcoins or to do something with Bitcoin. It's not all relying on this one Bitcoin blockchain. It's not like when people say, oh, in Bitcoin you only have 7 transactions per second. No, that means in the Bitcoin blockchain, which is the super secure, decentralized, censorship-resistant settlement layer, you only have 7 transactions per second or 7 to 10. But that doesn't mean Bitcoin, the currency, only has 7 transactions per second. So they're like pointing out technical limits which don't really apply to the currency itself, but just that one piece of the technology that you can use the currency with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to ask a few questions about the Bitcoin Association Switzerland, where you're currently the president. How did you get involved there?
So in 2013, there was one guy organizing Bitcoin meetups. I mean, like Christian told last time, in 2011, there were the first Bitcoin meetups.
Christian Decker.
Exactly. But in 2013, it took a bit more off. I mean, our meetups grew bigger. We were up to 30 people, which was quite a big number back then. And then end of 2013, some people around Lucius Meiser. So it's a good idea to start the Bitcoin Association because there are several reasons. It's still the same as nowadays. The Bitcoin Association is helpful. That is the first one back then, also the reason it was founded. So the media has like a neutral point to talk to. Of course, we're talking about Bitcoin, but we're not trying to sell it, and we're not trying to sell like a service or a company while talking about Bitcoin. That's one reason. The other reason is to talk to the regulator. And the last thing we're doing is community events. Same motivation there again. It's education. So when I got involved, or how I got involved, then it was like in 2014, I started to organize events with a speaker. So I was very lucky that we had some very well-known local guys around, like Peter Woolley, Christian Decker, Mike Hearn, Jonas Schnelli. They all live in Switzerland. So you could just like leverage that and like put them on stage. And then we had a small crowd from 30 to 50 people attending. And over some time, the Bitcoin Association, the only thing it was left doing was Lucius doing the regulation work. Nobody else in the board really did much. It's like always the problem also there, volunteers. I did my events without being part of the Bitcoin Association, but then Lucius asked me, do you want to take over, be president? I said, yes, sure, why not? So back then nobody cared about Bitcoin, right? The general attention wasn't that big. So it was just like, yeah, and Lucas will be next president more or less. Who votes for him? Everybody, like of these 10 people showing up in our General Assembly voted for me. And that's how I became president. So it's an unpaid job. It's still an unpaid job. Nobody gets paid in the association. It's all volunteers. It's all non-profit. It's just about, we are people who are promoting the Bitcoin in various ways. That's the goal, and it's still what we do. We organize events, we talk to regulators, we talk to the media. And we just got a bit bigger, maybe a little bit more professional, but still very much like grassroots driven, community driven.
Mm-hmm. Well, the events definitely got much bigger. I mean, now if you're like 200 people, it's always a wait list.
Yes, that also comes a little bit with with the price, obviously, the higher the price, the more people attend. But we grew from like 50 people attending to up to 300, which was in November last year. So that's a very important part for us. Also, what makes us a little bit known outside of Switzerland, that we have these events, we make high quality videos where everybody can like learn afterwards. So we have very strict rules with whom we put on stage. We don't have anything ICO related. Usually we don't have any products. We just talk about ideas, open source projects, regulation, that kind of stuff, so that people learn something. And the motivation there is the same as before. People learn something and they hopefully contribute something back to Bitcoin in any way.
I mean, you mentioned that it picked up the whole topic, and I mean, that's obvious, right? Since in the last few years, what kind of topics do you think currently are important, for people to know about in this field?
So, I mean, Lightning is very important. I think everybody who comes into Bitcoin right now or who has been in Bitcoin should know about Lightning and how it works. Then also, I mean, security is like a constant important topic. And the other one is privacy, which is also very important. So people learn that they're actually not anonymous when they use Bitcoin, but at least how they can protect themselves a little bit if they have to. And the other topic it's also related to Lightning, but in general is scaling. Scaling is like this topic that is always around when it comes to Bitcoin and blockchain. And what I'm personally very interested in right now is sidechains, and specifically the liquid sidechain. Because I think if you have semi-trusted parties, you don't need to be fully decentralized. Because the only reason to be fully decentralized is to be censorship resistant. But if you anyway have like trusted parties among each other, you don't always need this. So it's always about trade-offs, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Interesting. I mean, all the things that you mentioned now are quite advanced, I think, right? But people who have been in the space for a while, they know about Lightning, they know about Liquid, they know what sidechains are. But do you see sometimes a danger that, the specialists, the people who have been in the space for a while, just build up, it's like a house, right? They build story on story on story. And at some point, there's on such a high level that it gets very difficult for newcomers to catch up with that. I mean, have you observed that as well?
Yeah, that's true. And I also hear this feedback. So we don't have enough beginner events. That's true. We also only have events in English, which excludes a big part of the Swiss population. The reason for the English is that I think Bitcoin is not yet ready for mainstream. So if you don't speak English, you shouldn't deal with Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency, which is a bit harsh, but that's just how we see it. And also, like 50% of the people attending our events, they don't speak German. We should do more beginner events, but in the end, it always falls back to, we do that kind of events the organizer of the events likes to do. So if you don't have any volunteers that bring Bitcoin knowledge to beginners, then nobody's doing it. And I always care a bit more, like I invite the speakers that I'm most interested in. So we fly in speakers from all over the world that talk about specific topics. And usually those topics are more advanced then, because I don't want to hear Bitcoin basics 10 times in a row, obviously. So it's a little bit egoistic thing also there. Obviously, it's my free time. And it's also like to keep the current community happy. That makes also sense to have more advanced topics. But I mean, one thing doesn't exclude the other. So it just depends on, do we have enough volunteers or not?
But currently there's, for the beginner events, I mean, what you're saying is there's not enough.
No, there's not enough at all. I mean, we don't have any.
But would it help to have that? Or is this too basic currently? And is this the wrong focus? Or would it help to have these kinds of events?
I think it would help a lot. I mean, we need to give people an easy entrance into Bitcoin, but also a neutral entrance. So, there are many companies who do these beginner events, and usually they have something to sell. And then people get suspicious, or they get scammed. I mean, often like people sell something as like a free Bitcoin class, and then they pump their shitcoin or their ICO and so on. And that's actually, a problem, but it's tricky to solve also.
You said, I mean, you've been in the crypto space since 2000. 2011, right? Or
2013.
2013.
It's still late, but
well, still early, I think.
depends.
Today, what fascinates you still about this technology?
So the most fascinating thing in Bitcoin is actually that there's so much happening. There's always news, and there's always like, since this is about money, it's always like some critical news also. Like there's always something going on and stuff changing, and even through Bitcoin itself, from the protocol is moving very slowly, but the stuff around it is happening very fast. So that's very exciting.
Let's take a quick break for a message from our sponsors. 8th Grade is a media production company with a special focus on telling engaging stories about new technologies and the future. Companies work with 8th Grade to turn relatively dry content such as scientific articles, business white papers, or corporate narratives into engaging stories with films, interviews, podcasts, and other media that reach people on social channels and offline. To contact 8th Grade and learn more about making an impact with story-driven media, visit 8gr8.com.
Even through Bitcoin itself, from the protocol is moving very slowly, but the stuff around it is happening very fast. So that's very exciting.
But in terms of the ideology behind it, what do you think interesting there?
So the ideology is that you give people an alternative to what they have. That means to their money they have from government, they can use Bitcoin, but they don't have to use Bitcoin. So it's very much in line with this libertarian thinking that people have the freedom of choice. And I think also this is what keeps people motivated to stay in Bitcoin over a longer time. So those I know of that wouldn't have to work in Bitcoin anymore, or wouldn't have to work anymore, they usually stay around because the reason they came into Bitcoin was this ideological reason. And they didn't change just because they got rich. So they still work on Bitcoin. They're like, you don't see it when you come to our Bitcoin meetups, you have like a handful or a dozen of those, but you don't see a difference to all the others because they really care about the idea. And that's different to most of other fields, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's I think a very good part of it. I think it's a very flat community.
Yes. Exactly. I mean, it really depends on what you do and not how much money you have or who you are. It doesn't really matter. It's just like the core of the Bitcoin community is really about what you build and what you contribute.
I mean, I'd like to ask a question about that, about the ideology that you just mentioned, about that spirit also, because besides all your work, right, with the Bitcoin Association, with 21 lectures, you also work at a commercial software development company. And you're on advisory boards to the government, and there's bankers on there and politicians. And some of them, may also like this ideology, but many of them have very different goals and targets that they have to reach. So do you feel there's sometimes kind of a tension that you have to bridge somehow?
Yes, it's very tricky to keep balance, I think, for everyone, but you cannot be, like in real life, you need to take some trade-offs. You cannot be just poor 100% Bitcoin. I think nearly nobody's able to do that. I'm not so lucky that I can just work on Bitcoin in my free time because, when I got into Bitcoin, I was 21, so I didn't invest a lot of money. I just liked the concept and the idea behind it. So with my day job, of course, we also do things that I wouldn't do if it should be just for Bitcoin, but the end goal there is actually the same. I want to push the adoption of Bitcoin, bring that forward, build up the technology around it. And it's also a tool, when a client comes to you and wants to do something that doesn't make too much sense, in your opinion, you can still educate him, and with time and time, he will maybe go more towards Bitcoin. So you can do things and get opportunities to position Bitcoin at companies that you couldn't before. Mm-hmm. For the government or the advisory jobs around the regulation, for us is either we talk with them and we try to give our viewpoints, or they will just do whatever they want and without somebody from the field giving inputs. So it's obviously that we do the first version where we try to give as much input as possible.
But still, right? I mean, those are people, again, right? I mean, they're older they're new to Bitcoin, many of them, or to crypto and blockchain technology. And, the last thing they have on their mind is anarchy.
Yeah, and they don't have to. I mean, for me, it's not that we will create anarchy with Bitcoin, but that we give people an option, a choice. And I think that's something everybody in Switzerland actually likes. It doesn't conflict. Even the Swiss National Bank doesn't have a problem if there's competition on the currency market. It's just their job is to provide the Swiss franc. Their job isn't to hinder others from issuing their own cryptocurrency or something, or having their alternative currency to the Swiss francs.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Have you noticed, maybe in personal conversations with people that you work with, and also maybe in some of these advisory groups, right, with the government or with banks, that some people privately were actually quite interested, but that their maybe job or their position wouldn't allow them to express that?
Yes, quite a few people working at banks usually have that. They're privately interested, but they can't not do anything at the company. The bank usually fares reputational risk, but that also it's not as bad anymore as it used to be. In 2016, everybody talked about blockchain, but everybody didn't want to deal with Bitcoin at all or cryptocurrencies in general. Now, since the hype last year, it got a lot better. Many bigger companies, all traditional companies, want to get involved in Bitcoin, want to provide storage, custody services. And also, it's just that the market asks for it. If enough clients are asking for Bitcoin and they see that there's money to be made, they will sell it.
Yeah, just as they sell apples and oranges if there's a market in apples and oranges.
That's how it should be. I mean, that's the job of the companies, to make money and not to push ideology.
How do you... when I spoke with Jonas Schnelli as well. He's a core developer at... for Bitcoin. And he said he spends many hours each week just reading about, the technology, because he still needs to learn much more about it. But he's, as much at the core as you can be there. But for you, how do you keep current on the developments in this field?
Yeah, so that what Jonas probably does, he goes very much into the deep. So he really digs into Bitcoin and every piece of Bitcoin itself, the protocol. So this would be a bit too much for me, because I need to have a broader overview, also to present to our members from the Bitcoin Association new interesting topics that are in Bitcoin but not always Bitcoin itself. So what I do is, I spend a lot of time on Twitter, which gives you a good high level overview of what's going on. It also shows you actually who is interesting, who gives good talks, and who you could put on stage. And then it's just if you find this project that seems to be interesting, then it's reading papers, trying stuff yourself. That's the most important one, learning by doing, discussing with colleagues. And then also, again, when you go to these events, instead of having to read everything myself, I just ask my colleagues and attendees of our long-time community members and so on about what they think about this and so on. So, you have some people you trust, they're very knowledgeable, then you don't have to do all the hard groundwork yourself.
If somebody's new to this whole topic, right, and maybe read somewhere in newspaper some kind of hype story, or, just have some kind of half knowledge about what Bitcoin is or what cryptocurrencies are and what blockchain technology may or may not be able to do, where do you think should they start?
Well, the first thing, even before they start reading a lot, they just try it, I think. Because when you try, you actually see where Bitcoin is right now when it comes to usability. So just install a wallet, go to a Bitcoin ATM, buy Bitcoins for 10 Swiss francs, and send around a few Bitcoins to get a feeling.
But then they just know how to use something, right? But still, they may want to know about... you mentioned before ideology, you mentioned adoption, you mentioned, possible use cases. How would they get involved in those things?
So the next thing I would do is just read the Bitcoin white paper. Maybe you don't understand everything immediately, depending on your understanding of technology. But it's very short and easy to understand, I would say. And then the next thing there is, if you want to learn about the ideology, then it's for sure the Nakamoto Institute, which has lots of great articles. And then the easiest again, and I'm shilling Bitcoin Association or our events, but like you just go and you talk to people and then you learn from other people. I mean, this is also how I figured out about the ideological part of Bitcoin. I went to this meetup, then this guy told me about how all of this could work without government. And I was very skeptical, but I started reading. I just started like looking up names of these authors and digging into that, and the more I read them, the more convinced I am.
Mm-hmm. What for you is the main promise, I mean, we spoke a little bit about ideology, but what is the main promise for you of these currencies?
It's to give people a tool to not rely on government when it comes to money, because money is like the most important thing, or one of the most important things in the economy. I think if you control the money supply, then you more or less control the economy. And for many places in the world, you don't want the government to control the money.
I mean, do you see that on the horizon, that's possible?
It's very tough to get there, but I think we should at least aim for that. And we need to solve a lot of problems on the technical and especially on the usability side before we can actually position Bitcoin as a real alternative to most government money.
More community work needed and open source development.
Exactly. It comes back to that. More open source development, more community, but also more companies building apps around it. Because let's say you build a Bitcoin wallet in your free time, maybe after a year you have an accident and you can't like work on that many hours anymore. So it's really like you need to have some kind of business model or incentive around to build end user application. I'm convinced of that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, we're here in Switzerland, right? And you focus very much on Switzerland with Bitcoin Association Switzerland. But are you connected with other communities as well in this field?
Yes, we have very good connections to the community in Milano and in Munich, Stuttgart, mostly in Europe. Mm-hmm. Because, when we fly in a speaker from overseas to Switzerland, the Bitcoin Association has a little bit of budget by keeping all our money in Bitcoin since 2013. That was our trick.
That helps, yeah.
But the other associations or the other local communities are usually just meetups without some money. It's just paid from the organizers. So when we fly in somebody, we try to make sure the speaker also goes to speak at those locations. And just the others, I mean, there are these few big Bitcoin conferences where everybody or most of people who are in Bitcoin go to. Then you meet those people whom you only know from Twitter usually, right?
Mm. If you compare, the Swiss crypto community to those other communities that where do you think are the advantages and maybe also the disadvantages?
I guess the Swiss Bitcoin community is very international. As I said, 50% of our people don't speak German. So that's, I think it's an advantage because everybody can easily attend. At least everybody with a technical background and speaks English can easily join the meetups. Also, we have lots of foreigners flying in. When we have big meetups, people come from Germany to Switzerland to attend. We have a very technical community. Thanks, especially in the beginning, it was many people came from Google and from the ETH Zurich to attend our meetups. That's for sure an advantage. And that the Zurich, where most of our events happen, is also a hotspot for finance. So we have this nice crossover of technology and finance. Compared to disadvantages right now we are the 4th or 5th biggest meetup group around Bitcoin in the world. But we will not be able to hold this position just because Switzerland only has 8 million people living here. So if the others do their job well, they should grow much faster and much bigger than we do.
Mm-hmm. In the crypto space in Switzerland, what do you think should be better?
I'd like to have less focus on ICOs, less focus on utility tokens, and less short-term pumps in the general crypto scene, but more focus on Bitcoin and equity tokens, security tokens, just more things that make sense. Just talk more with technical people, talk more with developers, and don't just let don't let the business guys write white papers and stuff like that. It's just so many people want to build things that don't make sense. Don't make sense on technical perspective, or sometimes just don't make sense on economical perspective. Of course, it makes sense for them to raise money, but that's really bad for the reputation of Switzerland in general.
Mm-hmm. And that it did happen in the past, and there were big fallouts that actually weren't helpful, I think.
Yes, we had this few ICOs, and then of course these very big ICOs with the scandals all around and bad governance and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, correct. But still, I mean, that's a problem everywhere, right? But for example, if I look at, some of the new blockchains that come up, many of these developers may have started in Switzerland and may have their foundation in Switzerland, but then they're working in Silicon Valley, then they're working in New York or in Berlin. Why do you think that is?
Well, there are two things. One is the cost of living in Switzerland is very high. Then it's also that the number of developers in Switzerland is of course limited, and you can only easily get in people to Switzerland that are from the European Union, which makes it a bit more tricky. And the third one is, if you really want to have the best people in this space that already have a lot of experience, you cannot expect them to move to Switzerland. So I think it's a contradiction when you say you're going to build this decentralized ecosystem, but everybody has to move to Switzerland. That doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, good point.
So yeah, how we do it in my team is we have one guy in the Netherlands, then we have one guy is half of the year in Malaysia, and someone else a bit more far away in Switzerland, because I don't want to have everybody here having to sit here in the office all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I think so too. You have all this knowledge as well. I mean, you're a coder, you know deeply how Bitcoin works. Did you ever think about starting your own company?
I only had my own consulting company for 2 years, but I guess that doesn't really count as a startup. So I was thinking about it, but I always also think about the business model. And it's very tricky to make money with Bitcoin. I mean, miners make money, brokers make money, exchanges make money, but that's all not so interesting. So what is most interesting for me is user adoption, meaning wallets and application around that. And there were so many wallets from the early days that just disappeared because they couldn't find a business model. And I think it's the same right now. It's still the business model of the wallets, as far as I know, is mostly getting paid to add altcoins. That's one thing. And then it's
interesting. Shared. I didn't know that.
I'm not fully sure, but that's my interpretation because I couldn't see anything else how they make money. The other thing is the revenue share of Shapeshift, in wallet conversion. I hear that's a big chunk. And then the third thing that I like most is white labeling. So hopefully you find some company that pays you a good amount of money just to have their own logo on your wallet, more or less. But it's tricky to finance, to make enough money from that.
In Bitcoin. But what about, starting your own token like an ERC20 with an ICO back in 2017? I mean, did it never cross your mind?
No, because I'm in this for... one thing is the ideology. So I don't believe that it makes sense to have more than one currency, actually, in the end. It's just from my understanding from money is that I want to have the money that everybody else wants and that everybody else has. Now, if I create a new money, then I have to build up this network again. And then also the reason I don't like altcoins too much is that I think we have this really big challenge ahead of us with Bitcoin, bringing that somewhere. And now I'd like everybody to work on this, making this a success. Now, if everybody goes and makes his own coin, then we're just competing with each other, or it's like a waste of resources. I know it's a free market, everybody can do whatever they want, but I like the idea of everybody working together on this one thing and pushing it forward instead of how can I get rich with making my own token.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it was, 2017.
Yes. for 99% of the project, it was for sure that.
Okay. What about other, blockchains? Tezos, Neo, EOS. What about those?
Same there. Why did they create their own currency? Just out of greed, in my opinion. If they didn't need like that like the pre-financing and all that stuff, they would have built a sidechain. I mean, yes, sidechain technology is also still in its early stage, but I think it would already be possible to build something with that now. So if they would care about the technology, they wouldn't have their own currency. If it would be that is driving them.
Okay. Are you in any way collaborating with them? Because they also, of course, would benefit if there's more developers, if there's more action in the ecosystem, because that's also they need to show that there's adoption. They're also interested, I think, in having this in having this succeed, and they don't want to see Bitcoin fail either. So, I mean, do you have any common ground?
I mean, I like their ideology to the part that they believe in to have an alternative to government money, and that everybody should be able to pick his own money. So that's fine. We share lots of ideological belief with those people, I think. Of course, they also need a lot of developer, but I don't see it as my job the reason I'm doing the Bitcoin Association is also like, when I help Bitcoin, I'm not making somebody else richer. I would never organize a Tezos meetup where I know like the investors who bought these coins cheap get richer by me doing free work. That I don't have any incentive to do that. Same with Ethereum or all of those pre-mined coins. I don't see why I should like put in my free time to make these guys richer.
Yeah, good point. I mean, you mentioned the up and downs in the markets. You mentioned some of the projects that may disappear. But in general, how do market downturns affect your work with Bitcoin?
So it slows down a little bit because some companies, traditional companies, maybe if the whole market goes down, they put their projects that are still in very early stage a bit on hold because the customers don't ask for Bitcoin that much anymore. But also on the other hand, we have this few crypto banks and other big startups that raised a lot of money in Switzerland, from 20 to 100 million. And they're still building their thing. I mean, they're not just disappearing just because the market goes down. So it's like long term or mid term, it doesn't matter. Short term, it has a little bit of an impact.
Okay. What's on the horizon? I mean, what's in the future with Bitcoin Association and with 21 lectures?
So with Bitcoin Association, I think we will just keep things how it is. We don't change the running system. We have good big events. We have good work on the regulation side and good connection to the media. With 21 lectures, I might imagine that we also organize classes in Germany and in Austria, so expanding a bit, because right now we have a focus on Zurich. It's the easiest for us to start with, but I want to have more developers everywhere. I mean, like I said before, I don't think everybody should sit in Zurich or in Zug. So we would just want to have more developers in the Bitcoin space in general. Then also, one thing regarding that is all our resources for teaching are open source. So I would love if somebody in another country just picks it up and organizes his own courses.
Lucas, do you have, I mean, imagine you had one wish and there was something that you could change in the past or in the present of how the blockchain space evolved and how Bitcoin came up and how cryptocurrencies evolved. If you could change something there, what would that be?
I wish the people who are wasting their time on blockchain projects that don't make sense and altcoins come back to Bitcoin and contribute back there. So we are like one big community all working on the same thing.
Mm-hmm. So do you think you'll still be working with Bitcoin in 10 years?
So Bitcoin is a big experiment. So I don't know if it's still around in 10 years, but I hope so. If it is, I think I will, unless I found something that interests me even more. But there's so much enthusiasm in this community and so much stuff to be built and so much going on. I don't think I will find something somewhere else anytime soon.
Okay. Where can people find you?
I'm most active on Twitter. It's Lucas_LCLC, or on the bitcoinassociation.ch website. There's an email address to contact me.
Fantastic. This was great. Thanks a lot, Lucas, for taking time.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us today. More info on our guest and our sponsors is in the show notes of this episode and on the podcast website, theblockchainandus.com. To help people find this podcast, it's important that you download, subscribe, and give it a top rating and review on iTunes or on the podcast platform of your choice. I'm Manuel Staggers, and I thank you very much for listening.